We're back. I saw a lot of you guys stick around, which is fantastic for this psych-soc section. How's everybody doing? Great 5-minute break there. Rocking right back through this. So, going to switch gears a little bit. All right, I got Kristen joining me here in the pink, Liz in the blue. I still got Mike behind the scenes answering questions in the Q&A, ready for just another round of MCAT domination. So I want to start off our psych-soc. We're actually going to kind of change gears with the focus from our strategy perspective here, because this is the new part of MCAT 2015. What's up with this psych-soc section? So I want to address the white elephant in the room, and please be honest with me, because I'm going to be honest with you. Did anyone feel by the time they got to this section on the test that they were completely wiped out in terms of energy, and sometimes their eyes were going over words and it was like, oh my gosh, what am I reading right now? This is ridiculous, right? Yeah, I was super tired the first time I took it too. Oh my gosh, I didn't know what case I was reading. I didn't know. I mean, it was crazy. Yeah, towards the last passages, you're staring at this computer. It's been 7 hours. I just wanted to eat a sandwich, and I couldn't remember the difference between one theory or the other. What is happening here? Okay, so if you don't have a really big psych, soc, or biological foundations review from your prior background or whatever it was you guys took through undergrad, one of the key things that we're going to talk here at the learning goal is kind of set the way for our other 2 learning goals as well. And I'm really excited about this. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, when I first went this, as we went through these changes, I struggled with this section a little bit. And this first learning goal really kind of hit the light bulb in my head and said, wait a second. This is something that I can I can get this. I can feel this. And building that confidence, especially after my own first couple fillings, I started to say to myself, this isn't so bad. And after a while, because remember, success just happens with this hard work. It pays off. You start to see, I almost wanted to get to my psych section because I knew I was going to do better at it. So we're going to talk about some, in this particular episode of the MCAT channel, about deducing the meaning of unfamiliar terms. Of course, this is going to be term heavy, and that's going to be a key place to look for some flashcards. Then what we're going to get into is we're going to extrapolate improvements and next steps in experimental design and research, and then the tables that can be presented and how we can use that to our advantage to interpret statistical data sets. This is the key to Psych MCAT domination here. This is where all of your lovely points are going to come from just by starting off and saying, hey, if I can get a couple of these psych and soc terms down, be able to interpret some tables, I'm getting a few more questions correct in each passage. Let's take a look. So learning goal number 1, specifically focused here on our unfamiliar terms. So where to find the terms, all right? There's tons of different resources to help you learn the psych and soc terms. One of the things that I go back through, even when I'm going through and teaching classes or going through a review like tonight, I always like to make sure that I know my terms. And what I first start with, we have our lesson book that we obviously are going through during our class time, but we also have our MCAT Behavioral Sciences review, and one of the best ways to go through terms, our High Yield Problem Solving Guide. All of these things are still going to be key opportunities for us to just continuously be exposed to the psych and soc terms. So one of the things that I did, and it's going to sound like a really simple thing to do, but I highly encourage you guys to still do it, is just simply take out a highlighter or start a note. This is actually what I did. I just started a list on my notepad in my phone of all the different terms I need to make sure and just look up. Because physically and mentally, the process of just going back and looking it up is just going to help you retain that information. So when you do see it in the question, aha, now I remember I've seen that before. I can apply it to a new or novel concept. So how are some strategies for when you approach an unfamiliar term? So did anyone feel like they were going through this section, or only 2, that they did get to some terms and they just simply forgot what that term meant? It happened to me. Yeah, of course, right? Quinley, thanks for being honest. Andrew, absolutely, right? And that's completely okay, all right? But if we can look for some clues, etymological clues, specifically with the word structure overall, that's going to help us kind of link together unfamiliar terms, but at least give us contextual clues as to what's happening, all right? Manira, if I said your name incorrectly, please let me know. But Manira, you're absolutely right. Sometimes you get to that psych section and you just start clicking answer choices because you have no idea what those words mean. We're going to give you the tools to make that a little bit different. So reading the question stem and obviously the passage and trying to recall some of that information is, of course, going to be key to knowing that we misuse this particular amount of context. But what we can do for now is either write out those flashcards or create that list so that we continue to kind of build that vocabulary over the period of time as we're studying. Remember, again, just like I said in our previous channel sessions, when we make mistakes early and often, we don't make mistakes on test day. So if we can study through kind of our subject groupings rather than just one big bunch, let's try to put this together so we do have kind of an opportunity to at least have recall from a memory mnemonic. Now, if you can download the MCAT flashcard app, that's just the icing on the cake. Just going to be one more way that you guys can see those clues. So let's get right into this. I'm going to go right back to question number 25 here, okay? Straight from your Fully 2 Psych section. So, of course, if you guys feel like we're going through some of the questions tonight and you remember like, I got to that question and I just, I made a silly mistake or I was tired at that point, that's okay. What we want to focus on here is not so much the content review, but more, is there a strategy in case I ran out of my content or I missed something, okay? So how can we, again, take shortcuts to get more questions correct in a shorter amount of time? So it said, which of the following would be most representative of the symbolic interactionist perspective on segregation in education? Well, let's break down the word symbolic interactionist. If you think about it, symbolism is something representing a concept through another. Okay, usually you can visualize a symbol, something that's symbolic, it's representation. You also have an interactionist. Well, what does an interactionist give? Is there societal implications there? What can we deduce from this information? So you want to note in this particular way, you're not necessarily going to be able to 100% of the time go through and match the correct answer choice. But just by going through it here, I can actually make a pretty quick guess right to answer choice A. Segregation enforces labels upon individuals, making them less likely to feel their potential beyond those labels. Some of you guys are sitting back, but wait a second, how did we do that so quickly? Well, if you look at all four answer choices, A is really the only one that's all about labels. And that makes sense to relate it back to our symbols. So you can hold on to A, but what I would do when I was going through this during the test is I'd still look through B, C, and D. B, educational segregation was designed to maintain disparities in power between the upper and lower classes in society. Well, that's the design to. That could explain the reason why it would exist, but it's not necessarily something that's, again, describing much to do with the symbols. C, segregation is detrimental to the social and cultural integration of groups that are kept separate from one another. Well, that's just focusing on the effects of segregation. It doesn't have much to do with the symbols of them. And then D, educational segregation harms individuals because it's adaptive for some groups in society and maladaptive for others. So again, the effects of segregation, but doesn't really address that issue of symbols. So in a way, isn't this still the same process of elimination that we can use through other sections, just applied specifically to our psych soc here? Exactly. Excellent. Good. Glad you agree, Lauren. Great way. Pick up some easy points. Let's roll this and do another question here. Again, focusing specifically on learning goal 1 here to show us ways to use these words, the literal interpretation of these words, to our advantage. So 14. If a group of individuals diagnosed with personality disorder, okay, were found to believe that their socially destructive actions should have yielded neutral or positive social results with those around them, they would best support which personality theory? Wait a second here. What's the key feature in this question that actually gives me a context clue directly from the question stem itself? Doesn't it say here if a group of individuals, first and foremost, right, diagnosed with personality disorder were found to believe their socially destructive actions should have yielded, yes, Manira, you're absolutely right, social. So if you think about it in that perspective, socially destructive habits lead to neutral or positive results. What's the one answer choice, if I had to guess here, that really is the only thing that deals with a individual towards society effect? Yeah. So if you think about it, a lot of the terms in a way start to self-describe themselves. That's your social cognitive perspective. How am I being viewed or believing that my actions are being presented towards society? What's the results of those actions ultimately going to be? So again, focusing here on this first learning goal, using the structure of these phrases as a big clue. Now, of course, there are going to be some things that we get that we have to have memorized. Yeah, but I'm going to point those out a little bit later on during this session. Okay? And Lauren, I was the same way. I definitely got bogged down in certain areas. But this is why it's so important, not always that you're missing answer choices because you misread question answer choices. Sometimes we just miss questions because we got bogged down or misread the question stems. That's an important thing to look back when you're reviewing your full lengths. How about 15? Now, I remember 15. I got this wrong the first go around. But why did I get it wrong? The experiment is most clearly measuring response to what? So whenever you're looking at something like this, you do want to make reference to the passage. With approximately 10 minutes for questions and passages when they're grouped together, you want to make sure that it's, especially because this is the last section on the test, that your pacing is important. I want to be able to go back here to understand the experiment. So let's take a look. In passage 1, it goes through and it says, in a separate study, participants were led into a room in which one of 3 scenarios was occurring. 2 people having a friendly discussion about plans to see one another in the future. 2 people sit without acknowledging each other. That might be awkward. And 2 people have an awkward conversation in which one participant takes action to end the conversation. In each of the scenarios, these 2 people are then led out of the room, and a third person, the subject of the experiment, enters. The study noted the 3 different scenarios. The study noted 3 different scenarios and whether the subject witnessing the previous interaction made attempts to start a conversation involving, at minimum, self-introduction. Hi, I'm Pat. Table 1 shows the results of this study. No, wait, I just read a lot of information out loud. Do I really need all of this information in order to answer this question correctly? Do I need it all? Lauren says no. Do you guys agree? No, not necessarily, right? If anything, what sometimes we end up doing in psych, yeah, exactly, just get the gist. Because if you start to fall in this bogged down information, we start to get caught up in it, and it actually just slows us down and makes the questions more confusing. So if the study noted whether the subject witnessing the previous interaction made attempts to start a conversation, that just gave us a huge context clue just by getting the gist of what was happening. So the structure of the study of the passage, we're observing a change, a subject's behavior, right? How did it change depending upon? How did the subject's behavior change depending upon the environmental surroundings they were exposed to? Okay. This question doesn't seem so bad to me now. If I'm looking at classic conditioning, operant conditioning, behavior modeling, or innate behavior. Well, I'm going to see right here, there's 2 answer choices that I can eliminate right away. Does anybody like 2 answer choices they can eliminate if we're observing change? I love it, guys. When a subject initiated their own conversations after witnessing all of this, it's not conditioning. There is no conditioning happening with this in this study because there's no rewards or punishments that's modifying any behavior. Right? There isn't positive or negative behavior happening here. So what you're doing is you're literally just seeing behavior. Now you're stuck between C and D. What is innate behavior? What is innate behavior? It's a good thing to review here just to make sure we keep that in mind. It comes naturally, right? You're born, yeah, you're born with that behavior. It's literally, as the word is used, innate. So when you see that, then theoretically, aren't we just mashing to answer choice C? We're not looking at innate behavior. Even if you forgot what behavior modeling was, I can still eliminate answer choice D just based upon the logic of knowing what innate behavior was. Again, we can assess and plan, and we can use the process of elimination. So by going through this, we really have unique advantages by having 2 strategies to get more questions correct. Excellent. Now, Question number 19. Let's flip this a little bit here. So we're kind of going to tweak the type of question being asked here. Okay? So in 19 it says, a person enters a waiting room with a television that is switched off and sees several people reading books in the room. If he then decides to read a book rather than watch a desired program on the television, his behavior can best be described as what? Okay. Well, there's some important details here that actually give you huge context clues. There's an environment. People are present. Is this person being persuaded in some sort of way by the environment that they're exposed to? Yes or no? Absolutely. So just think about it. We can very simply break this down then. But the person then ended up reading the book rather than changing the channel. Okay, that's fair enough. Ooh, good clue there. So if you look at these scans, you have social obedience, social conformity, personal deviance, and personal gain. Manura is saying that's not personal. Would you guys agree that we can eliminate answer choices C and D then? When you really think about it. That's a pretty quick elimination there, right? It's got to be social. So was that person, when they were exposed to this environment, conforming to the rest of the people present, or was it in obedience? Notice the difference in the words. It's got to be social conformity, all right? Notice the difference there. There wasn't any instructions. There was no rules. There was no demand being placed on that person. If that's not happening, all right, the demand for the person to read a book, it's not going to be obedience overall. Very good, guys. You guys are getting the hang of this. I love it. Okay, let's roll right into question number 10. What's the one thing you do notice about the answer choices in 10? It's a little bit different than the questions that we originally pulled here for learning goal number 1. Yeah, so it's literally showing you an example. And nice and short, a miss, context effect, deja vu, or false alarm. Those I'm pretty comfortable with compared to some of the other ones in the psych-social section. Excellent. So when we look at this then, it says a research participant is presented with the following list of words: train, engine, freight, steam, caboose. When later presented with individual words and asked to recall whether the presented word was on the original list, the participant identifies track as having been on the list. Okay, this sounds really simple, but was track originally on the list? This sounds like a simple question. Okay, no. Would that theoretically help you eliminate one of those answer choices if it was not present on the list at first? Yeah. So Quinley was saying, Renee was saying, absolutely. It's not a miss. They didn't miss anything. So this person here was primed by train-related words. So the answers, okay, the context does matter, right? But a false alarm happens when there's a mistaken belief that an event occurred. Is it literally deja vu? That was the other one that kind of stuck out. But I think, can't you kind of eliminate deja vu? If it didn't happen, deja vu is literally, okay, you guys probably heard this in experience too. This is when someone imagines that they've seen or been somewhere before, but this is different than actually inserting something that wasn't present overall. So just to clarify what deja vu is, that's when we imagine having seen something before when it wasn't there. So we can actually end up getting rid of that. I feel like I've been here before. Have I taught this before? Right? So we're actually kind of stuck between B and D. Context effect or a false alarm. What actually ends up being a better fit based upon a literal interpretation? This is kind of tricky. I'll admit that. Literal interpretation of what it is. Lauren says D. Do you guys agree? Pressure, pressure. Yeah, it is. You're right, Lauren. You're absolutely correct. It's D, a false alarm. Think about it. Was track part of the context? Yes or no? Was track part of the context? No, not really at all. It's not part of the context there, so it's technically not a context effect. Excellent job, guys. Good. Okay. Question number 4. This is a great opportunity to see exactly where we can pull specific wording. So 4, it says, researchers suggest that people from individualist cultures, so cultures that value personal goals and independence, tend to overestimate the role of their own capabilities and effort played in success more than people from collectivists. That's pretty easy to see, cultures that value conformity. What explains this phenomenon? Notice in this question in particular, you're going to see how quick this is, just by knowing vocabulary. I got a quick answer here. Self, about oneself. Emphasis. Literally that word itself means not drawing attention to oneself. Well, what term explains this phenomenon? It's not, are we doing anything here defensive? I mean, not really. Attribute? An error? Or learned helplessness? Just by going through and fundamentally just saying conventionally what do those words mean, let's eliminate some answer choices here. Defensiveness and helplessness do not explain this phenomenon at all. What it really is, it's a fundamental attribution error. You're fundamentally making an error based upon how you knew or overestimated your role. If anything, answer choice A is an example of what type of wrong answer choice? Now that we know the definition. What type of wrong answer choice would A be? Yeah, it's distorted or literally opposite. If you come from that individualist culture, if anything, you're going to want to draw attention to yourself. Good. Excellent, guys. Okay. Learning goal 2. So we kind of set the scene here, right? Now, learning goal 2, we want to extrapolate improvements and next steps in experimental and research design. How is this important for what we're presenting? So we want to see here, we're going to do a couple quick reviews, all right? The Belmont report, or basically, is going to be our standard of ethical research, okay? So literally, this Belmont report gives us some of the ideas as to what? It's short for the full title. The Belmont report was literally the Belmont report, ethical principles and guidelines for the protection of human subjects of research. So there's 3 main things we want to do and refer back to, similar as we talked about during our lessons. Okay, so respect for persons. Volunteer after being provided with adequate information, meaning that our volunteers, whoever for our compliance, have to know and get as much information about the study as possible. Special protections for children and anyone whom might be incapable of thoughtfully coming to an educated decision as to whether or not they want to go through this study. What does beneficence mean? That's the one that I always used to confuse. Beneficence means that you can't do any harm. Future doctors, you will not do harm or intentional harm. So what we're doing here is we're trying to maximize positive benefits and minimize possible harms. Okay? So if this stuff looks, this is something you want to come back through for the MCAT channel. Things that we can start to understand, all right, just based on prior background content knowledge. And lastly, justice. You have to equally distribute benefits and risks. You can't go through something and ultimately see here and understand, well, hey, if I don't have equal benefits, it can't be slided or skewed one way or the other. Okay, so all risks and any potential benefits got to be equally distributed. All right. Now, let's take a look at some of the historical studies that were unethical. This is something you do want to commit to your content knowledge. We can also cover this in our review books, but this is a good review here to see how this is going to play back into this section of full length too. So, respect for persons. Milgram's experiment on obedience to authority figures. Milgram's experiment was the one done in the 60s. And the idea was to try to understand how such things as like Nazi Germany occurred during the Second World War. So what happened was there's an authority figure, basically just a researcher wearing a white coat, that would actually tell or command subjects to administer a painful shock to an unseen subject. What happened was it became so disturbing that after, I think it was 6 days, okay, 6 days, it actually ended up being canceled. Okay, this is something that couldn't happen. So the same thing happened with beneficence, all right, in the Stanford prison experiment. This one, right, quickly, the first week of going through the experiment, they had to stop it. This is where people would play the role of guards and people would play the role of prisoners, and guards were subjected prisoners to mental anguish. It got so out of hand that they had to abruptly stop the study because of the severity of the participants' behavior over a period of time. And lastly, justice. And this is the Tuskegee syphilis study, where it was studied the long-term effects of untreated syphilis on only poor rural African American men. The problem with it was they never told the subjects they had syphilis, even after we had cures to the disease. So there's just a quick content review for where we talk specifically about these experiments. So how can this help us in full length 2? Let's go back to question number 8. Now, what's the one thing we do notice about 8 upon first glance here? What's the one thing we do notice about 8? It sticks out to me right away. It's long. Yeah, I did not like this one either. It's super long. Okay? Yeah, and there's some wordiness to it. So let's take a closer look. It says a student conducts a study designed, all right, to test physiological responses to negative emotions. Which of the following represents the clearest violations of ethical research procedures? So let's go to A. The participant is shown emotionally charged and potentially disturbing images on a computer screen, but is warned ahead of time and is offered a chance to speak with a therapist afterwards. Okay, so that's respective of persons and methods. Okay, let's go to B. The participant is led to believe that he's administering a potentially lethal electric shock to a laboratory mouse, but is later debriefed and told the animal was never in any physical danger. All right, sounds kind of weird to me. A medically screened and informed participant is injected with adrenaline to produce heightened emotional arousal and then asked to evaluate the emotion expressed by others in short videos. All right, I don't really see C. I think C is one that I could eliminate. I don't think that's necessarily a major violation. There's a respect here. And then D, participants are selected from among volunteers who have previously suffered emotional trauma and are interviewed by a therapist regarding the participant's traumatic experience and emotional state. If anything, if you were to eliminate the 2 answer choices here, you'd want to kind of compare and contrast between, what 2 would those be? What 2 answer choices are we probably looking at more in depth here to make sure we kind of see what's happening? I think it's pretty safe we could eliminate C and D, right? But when I look back at A and B, which one seems to be a more clear, right? It's all respect for persons. Manira, very well said. A has informed consent. So what's happening, the respect for persons is violated very similarly to Milgram's study. The answer choice, B. In A, it says, is warned ahead of time and is offered that chance to speak with a therapist afterwards. There's informed consent for what's happening. Again, it's long and it's wordy, but by paying attention to those words, we have a quick. That's what the best part about this is, advantage on testing. Good. Excellent, guys. Now, statistical significance. General trends versus statistically significant trends. Okay. Well, what's hypothesis testing? Remember, we covered both here. Now, we're not going to treat this as a full review, but just more of a reminder for what we saw earlier. Okay. So, hypothesis testing, if the null hypothesis, that's when there's no relationship between 2 measured phenomena. Okay. Now, alternative hypothesis, there is a relationship between 2 of the measured phenomena. But what you also have to remember with statistical significance is how does this relate back to hypothesis testing? Okay? Now, test statistic, what does that mean? That's when we have a standardized value. What can be calculated? How can we actually take this data and say, is it relevant? But there's many different types of this. Remember the significance level. The significance threshold should be reached. So remember, what we call our p-values is 0.05. Or you can sometimes see it, and they would make note of this, 0.01, which in a way would be even more conservative over a period of time. Good. Excellent. So significance level can be referred to as alpha here. Now, what or how does this help us with some of the questions back in point 2? So let's keep this in mind. Okay? So in 24, all right, I remember this question specifically. All right? It says, if the hypothesis discussed in this passage is true, which of the following would be the best way for researchers to obtain statistically significant results? Okay? The level and the value is different. Sorry, just to make sure. The significance value, the p-value, is 0.05. The level for how much it might be different is referred to as alpha. Okay, just so that's clear. Now, based upon this, question 24, we have to go back, okay, and say to ourselves, okay, what was the hypothesis being asked? So when you look back at passage number 2 here, there's some things that we really want to make sure we pull from this. Again, just getting the gist. So one group of researchers was interested in the effect of institutional reform of the educational system. The effect, I know what I'm least interested in now. During the Civil Rights era, the academic attainment of African Americans, particularly the American South. Educational opportunities for African Americans were severely limited in the 20th century due to the effects of segregation. Over time, educational possibilities for this group increased significantly as laws were passed to ban segregation. The researchers conducted analysis of results from the Carolina African American twin study of aging. Okay, well, if I had the results, researchers correlated ages of pairs of both fraternal and identical twins to each twin's highest educational attainment, measuring years of schooling. The results, notice this is how we can use this to our advantage, are summarized in Table 1. So the researchers determined that while not statistically significant, the results did show the trend. Okay, so what values, or variables, excuse me, would the null hypothesis argue are the same? Well, in the age of the twins, the disparity between the twins, and the mean years of education. Okay, well, if I take this and I look at table number 1, what do you guys notice about mean education as you go up in age group? Let's go back to the table specifically. It decreases. Now, we don't see any data, okay, for 20 to 29, 30 to 39. But what do you notice about the correlation to identical twins versus fraternal twins? Which one has a higher correlation value? The identical or fraternal? Boom, identical. Nice quick things to recognize here. Then lastly, as you go up in age group, what happens to the correlation between the identical twins' education? This is where it is. It also increases. Lauren, Shamin, very good. Quinley, very good. Excellent. We got some great data here. So if you go back to this, it says if the hypothesis discussed in the passage is true, which of the following would be the best way for researchers to obtain statistically significant? What's one of the easiest ways to obtain something statistically relevant that was not statistically relevant previously? What's one of the easiest ways from a statistics perspective to do this? What can we increase? Boom! A little MCAT magic right there. Excellent, guys. It's just we want to increase sample sizes. So as they grow older, we need to see, to become more significant, a little bit higher sample size. Best answer choice here, I can already go through. If I wanted to complete a meta-analysis of other surveys of twins that included African Americans, I could therefore increase my sample size to make something statistically significant. Excellent work, guys, all the way around. Good. Now we notice this is becoming quicker and more efficient just by our general knowledge. But remember, some of you guys mentioned, sometimes you can get a little tired during this section. We've got to make sure that we stay awake, but most importantly, engaged. So you're always asking yourself questions as you're working through. So go 41. So switching gears here. Which of the following, if added to this study, would be most likely to test the connection between substance addiction and relationship behavior? Okay, well, if I'm working through this now, changing gears, I got to go back and I got to find the goal of the study itself, right? So passage number 3, it told you, okay, while studies have predominantly focused on substance addiction, increasing attention has been paid to effects on relationship of familial life of children of addicts. Okay, so for example, rash behavior such as eloping is considerably more common among children of addicts than amongst others. However, other measures such as immediate family size are not significantly different. Well, rash behavior. Let's go back to this. What did the passage state about the relationships in addiction? They give examples of eloping and some sort of rash behavior. Aren't all of these questions kind of saying the same thing? Or all the answer choices are kind of saying the same thing, right? Questions regarding the reasons for the divorces, specifically whether divorces were mutual or typically initiated by non-addicts, about the duration and number of relationships experienced by those who've never been married, addiction happening during the duration of marriages ending in divorce, or regarding the nature of relationships and whether the actions of individuals in the study were compulsive or more rational. Wait a second. Let's go back to this question stem. It says, which of the following, if added to the study, would be most likely to test the connection between substance addiction and relationship behavior? What's really the only answer choice that's talking about rash behavior overall? D. Isn't this a little bit easier going back through it now, guys? If I know that D is the only one talking about compulsive or more rational, boom. I got a nice, quick, easy answer here. Be able to match and move on. So, if anything, do you guys notice the theme of some of the questions we're going through is more about trying to cut out a lot of that information you get bogged down into and just trying to get to the gist or to the point of it right away? Yeah, absolutely, Lauren, just like you were saying. So, for those of you guys who are just with me in Chem Phys or in some of the biochem sections, if anything, this almost changes our strategy in the Psych-Soc section to a point. We want to treat this as to make sure we're getting the main gist of this information as we're working through. Okay? Excellent job, guys. Very good. Now, 52. Okay? 52, I got to find some criticism. Which of the following would be the most logical criticism of potential personality disorder diagnosis based on the information in the first paragraph? Hold on a second. I have to find most logical criticism, okay? So I'm definitely going against what's being talked about. Let's go back to paragraph 1 and passage 4, okay? It's okay. Let's understand why, if you changed it, were you incorrect then. Personality disorder is generally diagnosed using the tools of behavioral psychology. The process is highly controversial. Okay. The use of societal norms as a potential basis for the diagnosis of personality disorder is often criticized. Some psychologists argue that disparate expectations placed on the individuals within diverse environments can lead to value systems that are different. If I'm criticizing that and it's different, and the psychologists are arguing that, then what I'm saying is if I'm in a different environment, aren't I going to have different behaviors based upon that environment? I'll take a really extreme example. If I'm in a kindergarten classroom or I'm in a nursing home, aren't you going to interact with that environment differently? Aren't societal norms going to be different? You can make it even more extreme than that, right? If you think about it, are you going to finger paint in a boardroom, in a corporate office? Under societal norms, of course, right? No, okay? All right? You're probably not going to. Let's check it out. I know, man, I wish we could. It'd be great if we could color on the MCAT, right? Go back to 52 now. Check out how this is so much easier. I'm not hating. Don't worry. Which of the following the most logical criticism? So, diverse environments can lead to value systems that are different. If I go back and look at these answer choices, A, behaving in a way that disadvantages one's own interests is something that most people do inadvertently throughout life. B, people are typically conditioned to adjust their behaviors based on situational cues and norms, making behavioral inconsistent. A severe socioeconomic disadvantage could condition an individual to adopt a value system that significantly deviates from that of a dominant society. Or someone in controlled and limited environments may be able to avoid diagnosis just by being that. Okay, so that's a great question to ask here. Because when I first look at this, right, I'm thinking that I can probably eliminate A and D. I'm probably stuck between B and C. Your correct answer choice here, and a very good question, is C. A severe socioeconomic disadvantage can condition an individual to adopt a value system that would be different than that society. But if you look at B, people are typically conditioned to adjust their behaviors based on situational cues and norms, making behavior inherently inconsistent. Does that lead us to a diagnosis? Because what was the question asking us? The most logical criticism of potential personality disorder diagnosis. See what I'm seeing, Manira? The key there is the diagnosis part, right? If you look at B, B doesn't lead us to a diagnosis, does it? What we're trying to figure out is what's the criticism of that potential personality disorder, right? So, does B lead us? Exactly. The person in C could be diagnosed. We would understand the reasoning why you have that deviation from dominant society. Excellent job. Again, this is going to help you out for future full lengths down the road. Excellent job, guys. So, last but certainly not least, this is what we've been building towards, is learning goal number 3. Okay? How to notate passages effectively. So, what are notation strategies that we can use? So, basically, what's the effective scratch paper when analyzing data? This is one of the things that I found most helpful for that fatigue aspect. Okay? So, I was showing you guys, and that's the first question that I asked through this first this first channel session, how many of you guys felt just, and even if it was just a matter of like kind of slouching a little bit lower in your chair during this section, or kind of putting your head down as you were reading, anybody find themselves doing that, especially in the back half of this section when you took the polling? Oh, totally. A lot of us were mentioning that right away, right? I'm guilty of it too. But one of the things that you need to be sure to do is how can you keep yourself as engaged as possible? Well, maybe I could use my scratch paper. Yeah, posture is a big thing, right? Posture is going to be a big thing. But I could also use my scratch work. Yeah, and you're right. Some of the passages are boring. All right, that doesn't help. But if you can use arrows and kind of write these things down on scratch paper, you can do it. So if I want to talk about psychology, I always tell this story. Something that sometimes people do, all right, is when little kids are learning how to read, they have this magic marker, okay? So this is an exercise that sometimes teachers will use. And you guys ever see when little kids are first starting to read, they get so excited to read their book, right? You gotta kind of, you get your favorite book and you go through, and they go through all the paragraphs, and then they're like, I read it out loud, but I don't remember anything that I just read. Right? I have a little cousin that's like 7 right now, and like he's not great at reading through it, but it kind of, you know. So what they do is they give him this magic marker, and what they tell him is after they go through each paragraph within the book, they make their favorite symbol, or they make a smiley face with their magic marker at the bottom of the paragraph. That's what notation is doing for you guys, because what it does is a subconscious thing for us to say, hey, what is the trend or pattern or the relationship? All right? So let's do it. Let's keep calm here, notate some stuff, and rock that MCAT. Again, just a little bit more MCAT magic to get some more points. So how can I go through this? Let's say that if we increase our studying, it's going to have a positive correlation to our MCAT score, right? So let's think about the inverse. So if a survey were to show us that 10% of Americans approve of Congress, that means that 90% did not answer approve. Does that mean that 90% of those people disapprove of Congress? No, it does not. It does not necessarily prove that, which is important. So we're going to do and take a look at a very specific example here, okay? So depending upon your answer choices, inverse statistics are not something that you can always easily answer. Let's take a look at 17. Which of the following is best supported by information in Table 1? Let's go back. If I look at table here, the scenario in the room, friendly conversation, it says percentage of subjects who began conversation. If there's no conversation, that means that 88% were silent. If there's awkward conversation, that means 75% were silent. Okay. Well, what can I do then Okay? What can I do when I bring this back? If I see this here, what I know to be true is of the conversations heard, if I hear something that's positive or a friendly conversation, the subjects tend to converse, right? If there's an awkward conversation, they tend to not converse. But if they have an awkward conversation, do people still talk more than if there was no conversation? Yeah, they do. So let's go back to this. It says, which of the following is best supported by the information? So what trend occurred in the table is if there is conversation, there will be less silence. For awkward conversation and no conversation, the majority of them do not converse. Done. Vicarious emotions can influence immediate behavior for those in similar circumstances. If you really look back at 17 here, and you notice I said this so quickly, it's because if I go through anything with A, B, or C, A, witnessing conversations influence behavior more than witnessing no conversation. You can't necessarily prove that. The most significant data showed that if subjects witnessed no conversation, they were 88% likely to follow suit and not talk themselves. But B is wrong for the same reason. Observational learning is more likely to influence action in social situation than non-action. Again, can't necessarily prove it. And then C, witnessing lack of interaction is less powerful behavior modifier than witnessing a never interaction. No action was the most significant trial here. Okay? So everything's wrong for the same reason we listed out. Good. Let's do this again. Okay? Take a closer look here now. 22. How many of you guys happen to remember 22? I'll be honest, I do. Yeah, it does make it so much more obvious. But how many of you guys remember 22? Anyone happen to specifically remember this question? This was one that caught me. Okay, I will be honest here. When I first did 22, I got this wrong. Okay? It says, which of the following pieces of information, assuming they are true, could not be a possible finding based on data analysis of all the calls? All right, there's a lot. Yeah, Kristen said it. She took the words right out of my mouth. Not be a possible finding based on the data analysis of all the calls. Okay. Well, what can I do with this? Let's go back. If I look at the positive, neutral, and negative feedback, I actually find this one the most confusing because we're throwing in multiples here. This is something we want to make sure to pay attention to. If you have an accent, do you tend to have more or less positive feedback? Let's walk through this one a little bit more slowly here. I want to make sure this is clear. Lauren says less. Do we agree? You have less positive feedback. Okay? If you don't have an accent, you have more neutral feedback, right? But if you have a more or greater amount of an accent, do you also then have greater negative feedback? Yes. Based upon this data, okay, you can see that there is significant statistical analysis we can pull from this. So there's almost only 9% of positive feedback with a moderate accent, 37% of neutral feedback, and 54% of negative feedback. Okay, so moderate accent is definitely going to be the most negatively correlated here. So what we can do is we can say the greater the accent, the less the neutral and the positive feedback overall. That's fair. I can say that. Now, you can also say that the greater the accent then increases the negative feedback. So does this differ from the questions that we previously just looked at? Especially the first example that we looked at. No, it's not necessarily differing that much. However, is it providing us an extra amount of information here based upon the data table? That it does do. Ding, ding, ding. Little MCAT magic to end our session tonight. Let's check this out. This is my favorite part. Okay, you look at table 4. it says the accent of the technical advisor. You have no accent, mild accent, and moderate accent. I also have additional information. Who has the higher escalation request? The moderate accent. Ooh, now we have all of this information from the passage. What this allows us to do is, as long as we're staying engaged and I'm writing this down on my scratch paper, guess what? I'm sitting a little higher in my chair. I'm not so tired anymore. I just got my second wind, and I'm increasing my testing endurance in the last section of this exam. Now, if you can't tell already, I am just full of positive motivation because it's an attitude, all right? If we go through the whole time and we say to ourselves, oh, man, I'm always going to be tired at the end of the psych-soc. I'm always going to be tired when I do this. I'm always going to be tired when I do this. Get out of here. Let's just have a positive attitude about it. Know that this section is just full. This is my favorite part about it, is when we start to realize this section is full of so much good information that's going to help me pick up easy points. This section is actually a really huge area of opportunity to increase our cumulative score. Just like I say all the time, a few questions here or there is allowing us to bump that section a couple scale points. What does that do? That also bumps our overall score a couple scale points. I'm now leapfrogging myself over thousands of applicants in the application process simply because I was able to note things, write things down on my paper, and be just a little bit more engaged as to what I was looking at. So let's take all this information, and you guys are going to do that very quickly, very efficiently on test day, and let's throw this right back into question number 22. So 22 says, which of the following pieces of information, assuming they are true, that's important. So we're saying all answer choices here, A, B, C, and D are all true statements, could not be a possible finding based upon the data analysis of the call. So what do the three wrong answer choices have in common? If anything, what do you think our best strategy to implement in 22 is going to be? Yeah, can I go through a process of elimination? Sure I could. Let's start with A. There were at least some callers who requested escalation and still rated their worker as positive. Can we say that would be true? Is that a possible finding based upon my data set? Yeah, I don't see why not, right? That's still a great answer choice here. But wait a second. Why is that a great answer choice? Think about what the question was asking us. Which of the following pieces of information, assuming they are true, could be a possible finding? So my question to you then, could A be a possible finding based upon the data analysis? Notice how I just reworded that question to make it a little bit easier in frame of reference. Could it be a possible finding? Yes, it definitely could be. There's no defined relationship with escalation and feedback, right? Now, wait a second. If I go to B, the ratings for callers who mentioned the accent of the technical advisor were automatically recorded as neutral. Is that something that remember what the question's stating here, which of the following pieces of information, assuming they are true, could be a possible finding based upon the data analysis of all the calls? Could that be a possible finding based upon the data analysis of the call? There you go. Okay, wait a second now. We actually just made this question a whole heck of a lot easier. If that cannot be a finding, isn't that theoretically what our answer choice is asking us for? So, I'm actually done. It's answer choice B. Now, on test day, I can tell you, do you have to go to answer choice C and D if you can confirm B could not be a possible finding? Do you have to? No, you don't have to. If you still want to go through, okay, just to kind of confirm your answer choice, you can go to C and D. Those could be possible findings. Maybe they're not necessarily true, but they could be possible findings, okay? So just note, it's the wording of the questions. But what I'm trying to show you guys here, and what I want to leave on tonight, is remember, just if you're going back through the psych section in particular. This is my key takeaway. If you guys leave here with anything tonight, this is what I want you guys to remember, okay? When you're going back and reviewing, just like we went through today, sometimes a lot of it has to do with just engagement, making sure that we're engaged within the question and properly reading our question stem and our answers. A lot of times, wrong answer choices in this section won't necessarily be because you misunderstood the passage or your content knowledge. Make sure you understand what the question is asking and the information it's requiring to pull back from the passage. Guys, this was an awesome session. I love when you guys are engaged in the chat. Way to go. Quick review for tonight's session here. Remember, we talked about unfamiliar terms. Get into those MCAT flashcards. Great way to pick up some simple information. Love that there. It's a quick, easy way. Talked about the etymological clues. Sometimes if we do forget words, how can we use those root words to our advantage? And then we went through our experimental and research design. Remember, it's not practice that makes perfect. If we can use these research design notations, it's good practice makes perfect. All right? Guys, you guys did a wonderful job in this channel session. I love the participation in the chat. Remember, like I say in every channel session, preparation or success is just when preparation meets opportunity. So you guys have another opportunity to go back in full length 3, rock and roll the PsychSoc section. I hope to see you guys back here soon. Next up, I have my friend John Linick ready to rock and roll. So I hope to see you guys back here again soon. Have a wonderful evening. And remember, in all things, MCAT domination. Have a good night, guys.